Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings, joined as always with Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how are things today for you?
It's going pretty well. Preparing for some snow this weekend. Seems like a couple inches. That's it. But we have a very fun topic this week. Anytime you get people talking about WWE versus AEW, it's always a barn burner. It's always just random discussions. They lead to other discussions and just other random things when you get people going on this kind of topic.
Yeah, I feel like I would try not to be redundant with the topics, but like if we're thinking about like what is the most exciting thing happening in wrestling just right now, it's really whatever AEW is doing and how it relates to wrestling at large, and how it specifically relates with WWE. But I wanted to focus on kind of like AEW's arrivals this year, and particularly people who have made the plunge from AEW or from WWE to AEW, and kind of the different roles that they've played on the AEW roster. I think there's a lot of discussion around it. There's discussion about, is talent being used as well as some fans would like? Fans had aspirations for these guys when they left WWE. Are they being used to their fullest potential in AEW? Some prospective people that are available or might become available, that what kind of role would they fit in AEW? I think there's a lot of discussion, Jason, about like if in AEW, do they have too much talent? Do they, we see that being talked about. How many people can they afford to bring in? How many people can they bring in and dedicate meaningful screen time to? And I think that goes back into like kind of how the roles people are going to be used in, is that not everyone is going to come they're going to come from WWE and jump into AEW and be Bryan Danielson or be Christian or one of these people who I feel like are going to be pushed, pretty hard and, be main eventing pay-per-views and such. And I think that's a big part of this, is like, how do all of these former names who theoretically have some expectations to be used on television, how are they going to fit in AEW where they might not be on TV a lot? So I wanted to start first with Bryan Danielson, who is, unless you count CM Punk, and I think CM Punk's a little bit of a different case as far as going from WWE to AEW. Bryan Danielson's by far the biggest one this year, and he's been by far the one who's been pushed the most. We're just taping this a few days after he went 60 minutes on AEW Dynamite with Hangman Page, but he's wrestled, the famous match against Kenny Omega at the US Open course. I can't remember.
Arthur Ashe.
The Arthur Ashe Stadium. I don't know. I was totally blanking on Arthur Ashe. I was like in Flushing Meadow, in Flushing, New York. But yeah, he had the big match at Arthur Ashe, which was a dream match. He wrestled Minoru Suzuki. He wrestled Miro at the pay-per-view, was supposed to be Jon Moxley and was probably supposed to beat Jon Moxley. Really been, he turned heel, basically, I shouldn't say basically, he did turn heel. I don't know how long-term his heel run is going to be, but really been pushed super hard by AEW in using him in a way that WWE did not use him, which is, in my opinion, he's now the master pro wrestler, which was the similar role he had on the indies, right? In WWE, he was presented as like skilled, but he was always the underdog. He was always the guy who was like fighting from underneath. He was the small guy fighting these big guys. If he was a heel, he was like a little cowardly heel. In AEW, he's been used either as a babyface or a heel. It almost doesn't matter. He's being presented as, this guy is dangerous. This guy's one of the best wrestlers in the history of wrestling. And anyone that steps in the ring with him is going to be under a ton of pressure to perform. And it's just a totally different dynamic. And if you're like a hardcore fan like we are, it's really refreshing to see Danielson using that role. What have you made so far of Bryan Danielson's, few months he's been in AEW, and how do you see how they've used him?
Yeah, I think for when he debuted, obviously it was sort of expected, but it still came as a shock to see him at the end of All Outs going after the elites right away. There was still a mark out moment still, even after 3 months off from that moment. But yeah, I think it's all just relative to expectations, right? Like we had talked about before, how if you look at Danielson's run when he came back to WWE for his injury, it was pretty lackluster if you looked at it in full context. Like they didn't really do much with him. He kind of sniffed the title scene, but it wasn't really that significant as we are seeing now with AEW, where it does feel more significant with him going after the title. And it has been very fun to see that. And I think it is sort of a reset for him for a lot of fans, especially for WWE people who only watch WWE, haven't really watched him on the indies. Um, and so I think that's taken a bit of adjustment for a lot of people to really just get used to this new Bryan Danielson compared to what we've seen him before. Like you said, he was mainly an underdog, and he was presented as, like you said, skilled, but never a dominant sort of figure like he is now. I think he's very much seen in like the UFC, like with Habib, when he was still active. Like anytime a fighter would go up against Habib, you were definitely the underdog, and he was one of the best fighters pound for pound. And that's what Danielson is seen as in AEW. And there's a lot of merit to that because he's gone up against various different challengers, your John Silvers, your Dustin Rhodes, different competitors. And so it's been very fun to see all that. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of fantasy booking that goes into this, right? Like, people want him to be the champion right away. They want him to really establish himself as the top guy in the industry. And obviously doing that is to win the championship. However, AEW has been pretty consistent with the way they tell stories, right? They don't really diverge from whatever they're trying to do very often. I think they will adjust here and there if something's not working, but obviously they want to tell a story of Adam Page as champion. We touched on this, like a couple weeks back on how to book Adam Page as champion, and we did sort of expect that he would, overcome the odds. We didn't expect a time limit draw, but still, I think this is part of Adam Page's run as champion, that he can go up against guys like Danielson and come very close to beating him. And I think for Danielson, it just more cements him even more that he is this sort of Iron Man type figure, going 30 minutes with Omega in a non-title match, and now going 60 minutes with Adam Page. And so I think it's been a very interesting sort of run. But yeah, I definitely think for a lot of people who've only watched his WWE run, it's been a big adjustment for them. And I don't know if when that's going to go away, maybe his heel run may change some things, but I think until he wins a title, I don't think that stigma is going to go away with people sort of questioning how well this AEW run is going.
Well, the dynamic from the companies and what they think of Danielson is totally different. In WWE, Danielson was pushed at times, but it was always with this air of reluctance, where if he was pushed, he was like this underdog trying to achieve something. And they never were like, we really believe in this guy as a top guy. We don't think he can be a top drawing card. For whatever reason, he's over with the fans, so we kind of have to push him a little bit to placate them, but we don't really believe in him as a top star. They never did. And you compare that to AEW, which is like, this guy's a top star. We need to protect him like a top star. We need to treat him like a top star. And that kind of leads itself to the dynamic shift in WWE. He's this underdog, and in AEW, he's this master wrestler. And like you said, with his feud with Hangman Page, to me, it's way more effective for Danielson to be in the role of, I'm the master wrestler. Like, you can't, he's healing it up for sure. You're a coward. You can't beat me. He's way more effective at making somebody like Hangman Page in that role than he is as the babyface underdog. In that way, he's more valuable to you as AEW if you're looking at, okay, we have this guy who, all wrestling fans will recognize. How do we use him to make some of our less well-known performers feel like bigger stars? And it would be like Danielson turns heel and he, talks a lot of smack to Page, and then Page, earns his respect, because that's where I think it's going. I don't really see this Danielson run as like this crazy long heel run where he's just like this total, POS, like terrible heel. I think this is a feud, if they continue it, where you can end it where Page beats Danielson, and Danielson just says, all right, you got me. And they shake hands, and Danielson's a babyface again. Because his character is not reliant on being like the plucky underdog anymore. So he can afford to be nastier. He can afford to be more manipulative. He can afford to do all of that because he's playing this confident character as opposed to this like little small underdog who's like trying to steal a win from one of the actual big stars. I feel like he's so much more versatile in this role than he was in WWE.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes back to, like you said, the way the companies and the perception of Danielson. Like for AEW, they, to acknowledge all of his indie history, his Ring of Honor history, and just his whole history in pro wrestling in general. For WWE, his history started with NXT, like the old version, the original version of NXT, where he was a rookie to the Miz, and that's the way they always treated him, as someone who has started from year zero, and everyone else like Randy Orton, your John Cena's are above him, your Batista's as well, going back to that WrestleMania 30 match. But for everyone else, like Danielson is obviously, like a pillar in the pro wrestling industry. I think there's like a whole tweet thread going around about like, the Mount Rushmore of indie wrestling, and Bryan Danielson is obviously in everyone's list in some type of way. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Like he's up there with the Bucks and all the other guys who have been around this industry, as really influenced a lot of people. He's influenced a lot of current wrestlers today, and it makes a lot of sense that he would be treated with respect, and why he is treated as a threat, because he has spent over 20 years in this industry, mastering his crafts. No matter what anyone out there says, he is one of the best wrestlers in the world.
And you can tell from his work, like this is a guy, and he wrote about it in his book. It's not a secret. He spoke openly about it in interviews when he was still in WWE. He loves pro wrestling. It's where his heart is. He wants to do it. He's very creative. He has all these ideas for what he wants to do. He has all these ideas for what he thinks pro wrestling should be. And it was really, bizarre to see that guy in WWE, where they handicap your creativity and they have a very, very specific version of what they think professional wrestling should be. And there's not a lot of compromise in that. And he like you said, I didn't feel anything at WrestleMania main event. It just felt like nothing to me. And you see him come out and he's doing so much different stuff, even stuff like I'm going to use a different finishing move for all of my matches, like all stuff that you wouldn't really see him do in WWE. You can just see him doing it in AEW. And, I want to have a 30-minute draw. I want to have a 60-minute draw. And not only is he doing it, he's doing it like on this grand stage where he's wrestling these really important, significant matches for the company. It's not like he's just doing it on a house show somewhere. And I think you can just see the life and the energy in his performances. And I really can't think of a better way to have used him than what AEW has used him as. Now, some people will say, he should have won the world title. He's your biggest star. They'll point to the Dynamite ratings and they'll say, hey, if Danielson was the champion, this wouldn't be happening. You need to have, the guy who most people know as your champion. I disagree. I just think long term, it's way better to have him in this role where he could be the champion one day, but for now, he's better off interacting with all these different figures and helping make them.
Yeah, plus with the ratings, it's all very small sample size, and they're all very volatile for very different reasons. Like, like like, oh, there's a good episode of Real Housewives on, and so everyone's watching that, or there's a season finale of The Challenge, and that's why everyone else is watching, or a big NBA game, right? Like, it's always very volatile reasons why the rating is the way it is. Like for the key demo was down, but total viewership is up this week, and so like, oh, that's very interesting volatility there within the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the winter is coming rating. I think it was disappointing if you're AEW, but I think like worrying over a week of ratings or even like a month of ratings, and like having that seriously adjust your booking. Like, oh, we can't have the title on Hangman Page. We got to put it on CM Punk, or we got to put it on Bryan Danielson. I think that's mental. I think that's crazy. Yep. If you have real confidence, and this is something about booking, and we've seen it throughout wrestling history. If you have real confidence in somebody, you have to continue to have confidence in them. Otherwise, you don't have real confidence in them. If that makes any sense. Like if you have real confidence in like a rookie starting quarterback, right? And they have some bad games, you don't bench them. You say, I have confidence in them that they're going to succeed. You can't having confidence in somebody when they only, achieve really big things and always have success. That's not real confidence because there's no reason to doubt why you know that person. And this is turning into a rambling thought, but ideally, I don't think you change really anything. And I think, like I said, long term, I think Danielson's way more valuable making people, having these matches because he's not like doing a bunch of jobs either. But at the same time, he's helping. I think he helped Kenny Omega. I think he helped Hangman Page on Wednesday night. I think he's going to continue to help. I think he helped people like John Silver, like people who he did beat. I think, and knowing him, that's, what he wants to do is he wants to get back to wrestling. He loves wrestling. He mentioned a lot in interviews, even when he was in WWE, that he wants to change wrestling. He wants wrestling to be this. And AEW is kind of putting him in a position, I think, better for him to achieve those like broader philosophical goals as opposed to WWE, where he's really just a cog in a machine, and his influence is even though he's on a bigger platform, his influence is blunted to a degree.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of where I was going. You can't just look at these volatile numbers that can change for any reason just because you can't change your booking because of that. Like you have to go where you want to go. Adam Page, for a long time has always been pinned as a champion, and you, like you said, you can't just give up on that just for a very arbitrary reason or very volatile sort of reasons. And so, I think it is the good decision to at least go to a 16-minute draw to set up something else in the future for Danielson, who, like he's going to help out more than he as in his current role than maybe as a champion. It's very possible for that. But yeah, if you do want to make him as champion, there is the option for that. But I think what's important is to really keep the what's the word? I guess the respect of the title for itself. I think we've seen that over the past like decade or so for WWE, where they kind of just flip flop the title for very arbitrary sort of reasons at times, and it kind of devalues the title in that. For AEW, for both of their top titles, for the men's side titles, the TNT and the AEW World title, like they've been done pretty good at spacing out these victories. Sammy Guevara is still the TNT champion, and it kind of feels like he could be that for a decently long time because they've treated those titles with respect, and they haven't really, flip-flopped for any sort of arbitrary sort of reason.
Yeah, and I think, and we could, maybe this can lead us into talking about Adam Cole. I think WWE, really passing around their world titles, and basically if you're in WWE for 10 years, you get a world title. And that whole kind of atmosphere, I think, has kind of shaped some fans who were coming to AEW's opinions on the world title. And like you said, something like, oh, people think that Bryan Danielson should be the world champion. And it's like, AEW has like one world championship change a year. They're not going to just, they don't pass the title around to anybody. So it might seem simple, like, oh, why don't you make Bryan Danielson champion? Or why don't you make CM Punk champion? Or why isn't Adam Cole the champion or contending for the championship? It's just different. They're really conservative with who gets that title belt because they want those world title reigns to be really, really significant. And I think people who are used to WWE kind of just passing the title around, it's a prop to give to everyone, and anyone who's considered a main eventer has been the world champion at least once before. It's just a different dynamic and a different philosophy behind the world title. And I think some fans, it's going to take them a time to adjust to understanding that someone can be a really big star and not ever be the world champion, or not ever be even a serious contender for the title. Like those people can exist and can have very successful careers and not challenge for the title. It's like, it's just one of those things that I think people think like the WWE are used to the way WWE books it. And so when AEW doesn't do stuff like that, it confuses them and it makes them think it's potentially a negative, when I think it's just different.
Yeah, I mean, just look at this year for the WWE. Obviously, the Universal Championship, Roman Reigns has kept that for most of the year. But for the WWE Championship, he had the Miz earlier this year take the title. from the Money in the Bank cash into Drew McIntyre. Then Bobby Lashley wins the title, and then now Big E through another Money in the Bank cash in wins the title. So you have 3 title changes in 1 year for the WWE Championship, whereas obviously AEW there's only been one with Paige beating Omega. There, even for the TNT Championship, like it's only been a very small number of title changes there, and so yeah, like it definitely a different approach to world championships. And I think for AEW, like you get to Adam Cole, like with his debut coincides Bryan Danielson, but he right away joins the elites. They didn't do this sort of, oh, will he join? Will he not join? Because everyone already knows they have history together as the Super Click, and they're already going with that right away. And I think it very much is for Adam Cole a reset for him for a new evolution of his character, right? For a long time, he was a leader of the Undisputed Era in NXT, but now he is part of this new faction. Not really a new faction, but for him, he's back with his friends, and they're really focusing on that. He's all of his antics are with the Super Click and the Young Bucks, and now he's got Bobby Fish with him as well, sort of tying in all those Undisputed Era kind of things there. And so his focus really isn't on the title, but he's still a very big name. All the fans cheer for him. They all do the boom with him in the Adam Cole baby. And so he clearly hasn't lost any momentum since his debut, but still, like, he isn't going after a title. And so I think that's what everyone is focusing on, sort of a title or bust sort of mentality.
Yeah, and like he came from NXT where he was multiple time NXT world champion and was always in the main event and was a clearly top push guy in NXT. And he's come to AEW and he hasn't contended for the world title, but I was really surprised to see so many people, having issues with how Adam Cole has been used in AEW. It was one of those things where I feel like it starts like on those like it starts on like troll Twitter accounts, like people like are not giving AEW a fair shake, that people that are making comments in bad faith, like they complain about Adam Cole, and then like it feels like it got picked up by people with more legitimate platforms, and it became like a real discussion point about like, oh, is Adam Cole being used well, or oh, they're blowing it with Adam Cole. And I was baffled by it, because you have to remember when Adam Cole was a free agent and there were rumors of him coming into AEW, a lot of people were like, well, Adam Cole shouldn't go to AEW right now because, CM Punk just came in. Everyone figured Bryan Danielson was coming in. Adam Cole will be overshadowed by those guys. He should come in when, those guys have been on the roster for a little while and he'll be a bigger star. But no, he debuts he debuts, and then Bryan Danielson debuts literally like 90 seconds after him. He couldn't have debuted like more of like, I guess, as an afterthought in that sense. But he's far from it on the roster. I mean, he is one of the most over people on the roster. I know people that were at the AEW taping in Chicago, with CM Punk and with Bryan Danielson, and they said, oh, Adam Cole was the most over person in the building. He got the biggest pop. His entrance is over. I noticed on Pro Wrestling Tees, I think he has like the third and fourth highest selling shirt on Pro Wrestling Tees, only behind CM Punk and Hook, and no one could compete with those two guys when it comes to moving t-shirts. So like he's over, and he's being used, like he's having matches, he's being pushed as a star. I mean, the Super Click in being associated with the Young Bucks, like that's top guy stuff. And that's another thing I think people have a problem with, coming from maybe a WWE perspective and then switching over to AEW, that like if you're in a tag team, that's a mid-card act. And that's not the case in AEW. The Young Bucks are main event acts. They're the most popular people on the roster. And you can make the case that, FTR are a main event act. The Lucha Brothers are main event acts. I mean, these are that's a serious role. So if Adam Cole's just, he's doing tag matches, that's not a mid-card role. That's not a role where it's like, oh, he's just kind of an afterthought. We called him up and we don't know what to do with him, so we're going to put him in a tag team, or we're going to have him do 6-man tags and stuff like that. I mean, this is legit superstar stuff, and not like fake WWE superstar, everyone is a superstar stuff, like real top main event stuff. And I mean, I would be very surprised if Adam Cole doesn't wrestle for the world. I would expect Adam Cole in 2022 to have a major challenge for the AEW World Championship. I don't know if it'll be at a pay-per-view because there's only 4 of those, but one of the TBS specials or something like that. Like, I feel like he's going to have one big singles match. He might even win the title. I wouldn't rule that out. I think they see him totally as a top star, and I see no reason to think that he wouldn't be pushed as a top star going forward.
Yeah, you could also win the TNT championship as well. I mean, you obviously had the past sort of feud with the elites in the inner circle. You could touch on those things and just mix it up with Adam Cole and Sammy Guevara. That'd be a very interesting match there. And you also think about the context with everything else as well. For Adam Cole, like, he was a big star in NXT. However, in the context of WWE, NXT wasn't really that big of a deal. If it was, Adam Cole would be pushed to the main roster much sooner than he actually was. And even then, like, if there was a report that even if he was brought to the main roster, he would just been a manager, an actual star. And I think if that timeline were to happen, I think people would still be probably even more angry and be more justifiably angry that Adam Cole is just a manager on the main roster rather than competing for at least the Intercontinental or United States championships. But for this, it's a much more best case scenario for him, and especially for life-wise as well. I think obviously before this the Twitch thing for him, and that was a very important thing that he wanted to just sort of keep, and for AEW he got to keep that. And so I think there's a lot of personal reasons for why he's happy as well, obviously in the same company as his girlfriend Britt Baker, and so I'm sure that's probably beneficial to him as well. And so I think just looking from a personal perspective as well, it's very much a good thing for him. But even on the pro wrestling side, like you said, being with the Young Bucks is a good thing. You're in a main event act with the executives of the company. Like, just take that into on paper, that's a very good thing in any type of scenario. And Young Bucks obviously covets tag team wrestling as well in any type of form, whether it's 6-man's, 8-man's, 10-man's. Like, they will cherish that because that's where they made their careers off of. Tag team wrestling or any type of multi-man tags. And so being part of that is always a good thing. And we touched on it before, like, Adam Cole is very over and still very over as well. I remember I took my mom to an NXT house show, and she doesn't care about wrestling, but the only wrestler she cared about was Adam Cole. Like, that was the only wrestler that impressed her for whatever reason. And so that's why I knew, like, okay, Adam Cole is actually a really generational star if he could get my mom, who doesn't care about wrestling, to like him. And so that's my impression for Adam Cole there.
Yeah, and like, the thing with Adam Cole, like, mentally, should I stay with WWE? Should I go to AEW? I mean, he seems like he's having the time of his life.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure he's being well compensated. He got his Twitch back. He's working with his wife. And sometimes people don't want to work with their wives, but I'm sure if that was a deal breaker, he wouldn't be in AEW. He's working with his friends. He's being protected. He's super over. He's working in front of large live audiences. He's not in the mausoleum of the Performance Center like he used to be. And just moving forward, like we talked about him contending for the world title, I think that they're clearly doing something with, Bobby Fish being around. And he's, he teased it on Wednesday. He said, "Oh, I got a Christmas present for you guys," referring to the Young Bucks. I mean, that could be Kyle O'Reilly. It could be somebody else. I would say it seems like they're planting the seeds for some kind of fracture between the elite. And my guess would be it would have to do with Kenny Omega coming back, Kenny Omega and Adam Cole not getting along, because as you see, as Kenny Omega's gone away, Adam Cole has become kind of like Kenny's role, like as like the associate with Young Bucks. You bring in Kyle O'Reilly, you might bring in another guy, you might add a new face to it if you wanted to. It just feels like they're setting up a blood and guts match between Kenny Omega and Adam Cole. I don't know what side the Young Bucks would be on. But it does seem like, I feel like in 2022, that's a huge feud. And, people might still complain that he's being misused if he's in that role. I will say my favorite complaint, and this is like a non-serious complaint that I feel like some like trolls have had. I just thought it was very funny, was that like people who watched Adam Cole in NXT, like Adam Cole is the next Shawn Michaels, because Shawn Michaels was is a agent in NXT and very hands-on. And Adam Cole is the next Shawn Michaels. He was supposed to be the next Shawn Michaels, and he goes to AEW and he's just goofing around with these young bucks and he's a joke and like all this stuff. And it's like the Young Bucks have been doing like a 1996 Shawn Michaels impersonation for like the last year. And so I can't think of anything better for like the next Shawn Michaels to be doing than to be associated with the Young Bucks, who are clearly very influenced by Shawn Michaels himself. So I don't know, it's just one of those things. I don't know how serious to take some of the complaints, but I was really surprised when I saw like people like, oh, Adam Cole's being misused. I'm like, oh, come on. No one actually thinks that. But then there are always people who think those things.
Yeah, I mean, definitely see that in some other aspects of like shoot sports, like basketball, where like guys like Damian Lillard aren't really seen as a high caliber player because they never won a championship. And I think that's where a lot of people go into, where it's championship or bust for a lot of people, where like if you're not winning the championship, if you're not anywhere near the title seed, you're kind of not anybody. And again, that comes from a WWE mentality where it kind of is that way in WWE, where if they're not really sniffing the championship or anywhere close to the title scene, you're kind of an afterthought, unless you're in like that Seth Rollins range, where like, you're sort of one of the guys in the company who've been around for a while, and you've kind of paid your dues, quote unquote, and you can kind of just do whatever you want. But for the most part, if you're not anywhere near the title scene, you're not really part of anything. You're kind of just on the undercard doing whatever. And I think that's where a lot of people get that perspective from, where a championship or bust mentality for a lot of people. And I think for, again, I don't know as well whether these complaints are serious or not, but I don't really know what else to say other than it comes from WWE mentality. I think that's my best guess for all of this.
Yeah, and it's not like WWE mentality is different. When you say that, it makes it seem like it's like, oh, this is how WWE fans, like their brains operate, and it's because they're like dumb WWE fans. And I don't even think that's necessarily the case. I think it's just they are unfamiliar with it, with how AEW is going to book its world title and book around it. And someone like Adam Cole can be a big star without like automatic just having to be the champion or be the top contender for the championship. The thing with WWE is like, if you just look at their roster, just like every person of consequence is like a former world champion at one point in their career. Right. And so it does have the mentality where, yeah, if you never, like you said, like if you never win a championship or bust, if you never won a championship, you really can't be that big of a star. I'm like just looking at Survivor Series, and I'm looking at the males at Survivor Series, like, looking at like the elimination tag match. We have Seth Rollins, Finn Balor, Kevin Owens, Austin Theory, and Bobby Lashley on Team Raw. Okay, so there's like 4 out of those 5 guys are former world champions. The only one that wasn't would be Austin Theory. And then on Team SmackDown, you have Drew McIntyre, Jeff Hardy, Xavier Woods, Baron Corbin, and Sheamus. And it's like, okay, 3 of those 5 guys are, so 7 out of the 10 guys in this, 5-on-5, mid-card elimination tag match are former world champions. And so it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, well, like so many people on the roster are former world champions. It does give off the vibe that everyone should be champion at some time. And that's just not how AEW is going to operate. We'll move on and look at some of these other names that have been on, maybe some ones who've been on for a little bit more time. Let's talk about Aleister Black, or Malachi Black now in AEW. He comes in from WWE, again, one of the guys who's released, and pretty immediately gets treated like he's a really big star. And while he was on the main roster at WWE and Adam Cole was not, I feel like Adam Cole was a bigger star coming into the company than Malachi Black. A lot of it had been because Malachi Black on the main roster, had been put on ice. He had been part of endless amounts of vignettes and stuff. And people just saw him, I think, more as a mid-card guy than Adam Cole, who, even if he wasn't on the main roster, was seen as a main event guy because he was that in NXT. But he comes in, basically immediately starts feuding with Cody. I think people have like mixed feelings about that feud. I think it might have went on a little too long, but during it, like, put over super strong. He squashes Cody in his first match, and to me has come across as like a superstar for AEW and as a main event act and a guy who's really over. And I think that it's been a total success for him. I'm kind of interested to see what he's doing going forward. He's teasing, I think, a stable, and there was a rumor that Brody King was being brought in, and it was even kind of teased on Dynamite on Wednesday. What are your thoughts on his run so far coming from WWE?
Yeah, I think all the mixed emotion, all the mixed reactions for the Black Cody feud mostly just stems from Cody himself and people just debating whether he's a face or a heel in the feud. No, all of the discussions had nothing to do with Black at all. Like, really, everyone agreed that Malachi Black was great in the feud, but for Cody, it was mostly just a discussion of him, whether he on the crowd reactions to him, and that's just mostly because how over Malachi Black was. I think everyone agreed on that, and I think for Black, like, his WWE run is kind of just symbolic of a lot of what ifs, right? Like, what if he was the guy to win the Royal Rumble instead of Drew McIntyre and to go on and face Brock Lesnar? Like, how would his career be different in that respect? And also with the Paul Heyman being like the executive director of Raw, like, obviously Paul Heyman saw something big in Malachi Black that Vince McMahon didn't. And once Heyman was taken off of Raw, Black's push pretty much was stopped from there. And when he got released, he was kind of in the middle of a feud with Big E, and who knows where that could have went from there, especially looking at where Big E is now as WWE champion. And so there's a lot of different what ifs for Black. And I think some people did sour on him a bit when his release happened. He was talking about all those different scenarios of his character, really just diving deep into the Fiend type lore. And I think a lot of people had a lot of fatigue from the Fiend in that aspect, where people are just done with lore in general. And definitely there's a lot of stuff there in his AEW run, but it's much less. It's more subtle than anything else. Like, if you really wanted to look deep into whatever Malachi Black is doing and symbolism in his character, you can look for his Instagram or his other socials and whatever stuff he's putting out. But if you're just watching TV, like, you don't really, there's nothing portrayed there. Like, you don't have to know anything else about his character beyond what he presents on TV as a badass and a very guy likes to kick people in the head and all that stuff. There's nothing else beyond that if you're just watching TV. And I think that is a good sort of compromise for his character there.
Yeah, like, I don't like the lore stuff. I don't like this whole idea, like, he sprays people with the mist and then the mist makes those people go crazy like later. I have no use for that. I really hope they stay away from that direction. He's definitely someone, when, like you said, when he got released, it was like, okay, this guy's got a lot of talent, but someone needs to be there at the controls to kind of curb some of his instincts, because he definitely was big on like the lore. I think on television he comes across great. I think his entrance is awesome. I think he's the kind of person that you put out there and you say, the hypothetical person flipping channels or looking at a thumbnail on Twitter, which is more likely to catch people now than flipping channels. Like, you see him and you see his look and you see his wrestling style, and he looks like somebody different. There's not really anyone else on television that operates like that. And so you really want to, what's this guy, crazy tattoos, doing like this Dutch Muay Thai style of fighting? Like, what is this? And yeah, and he's a good example again of a guy who can come across like a main event talent without, being associated with the world title at all. Like, he's not jumping right into the world title picture. But he definitely feels like a big deal. He definitely feels like he's on that upper echelon of AEW stars. And I think that's a big success, because when he was coming into AEW, he wasn't like viewed as like this guy who had to be a main eventer and was like an obvious super duper star the way that like Bryan Danielson or even Adam Cole was. It did take AEW did have to find a way to present him and make him look like a star, which they did mainly by having him just murder Cody. That I think brought him to a really high level within the company.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's had his own creative sort of influences there with his entrance and all that. He's been very open about like the things that he is implementing in his character. And like you said, there's obviously some reigns by Tony Khan and others backstage to like, okay, maybe there's a little bit too much here. I think Tony Khan has been open about that with sort of learning from the Broken Matt Hardy experience, where like, okay, maybe they did go a bit too far with the whole mystical and the supernatural type of things back then, since that doesn't really fit with AEW is. And so they've reeled the reins on that aspect of his character. And so, like you said, it's kind of wait and see so far. Whether Brody King will actually join him would be kind of interesting. They do have a tag team PWG right now. They're obviously very close friends, real life, and so that would make things more interesting there for the tag team scene there, and be very interesting to see him in the tag team division there. But yeah, like you said, he doesn't have to be in the main event scene. He's still very much a big star, no matter where he is on the card.
Right. Moving on, someone he's been associated with would be Andrade, another guy who has come from WWE to AEW. I think he's had a less successful run than some of the other guys we've mentioned so far. And he comes in and it's just really, really tough sledding right away. He comes in from like a really awkward segment with Vicky Guerrero. He goes through like Vicky Guerrero is his manager, then Chavo Guerrero is his manager, then Chavo Guerrero is not his manager. And it seemed like his first like month or so was kind of wasted in a way. They're trying to figure out exactly how he should be used. And then he ends up kind of in this feud with Pac, which I think really helped get him on the right track. They basically just said, okay, you're a good wrestler. Let's put you out here with this other great wrestler. Guys, just have a few good matches. And I think that did kind of help him gain up his footing in AEW. But I don't see him as, and we talked about roles. I don't see Andrade as like a real potential world champion or a guy. Maybe he could challenge for the title and maybe he could win the TNT title. But for someone who I think at one time WWE wanted to be like, this guy's a future world champion in their company, I just don't see him at this point, on American television being that star. I just don't think he has enough. Specifically when it comes to promos, and he has charisma, but I don't think it's enough. And he's a really good wrestler, but he's not like one of the 5 best wrestlers in the company. And so I see him more at a lower level. I think it's worked out okay for him since kind of the rocky start. But what do you make of him, in AEW?
Yeah, definitely very disappointing start to pair with Vicky Guerrero, which I guess that's their attempt to sort of like, obviously Andrade's success has always been with Lena Vega. He's as his manager. That's where his success has always been. And so I don't know if that's a attempt for AEW to try to recreate that in some type of way, to give him a manager to really help him out. Even though he's been very open, like his English isn't really that bad. And so like there's the only reason to have a manager is for like other reasons other than just to speak for him. Which is what Zelina Vega would do for him before. But I think for Andrade, I think a lot of his, for him as a wrestler, I think a lot of people like to tell themselves a story with him. Like you could very easily tell a story of how he can succeed. And they sort of give him qualities that I don't think are actually there. I think people definitely over exaggerate how well his character is and his wrestling style is. I do agree with you. He is a good wrestler. Don't get me wrong. But he's not very much, like you said, a technician, a top 5 type wrestler. And I think, especially with the all LIJ stuff, or just more Los Ingobernables stuff, like I think people like to tell themselves a story with all that there, trying to bring Rush in, trying to bring Dragon Lee in, trying to, always just try to bring other people in to really help them out there. And I think that kind of illustrates who Andrade is. If you have to kind of bring other people in to help him out, maybe he isn't really that strong as you might think he is, right? Like, if he needs to be helped out with other people, probably not the talent you want to probably in the championship scene.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like he always needs if he needs like a whole group of people around him to make him look like a star, then he's probably not like this can't miss talent. There's a way you can get him to that level, but it would require, a perfect situation. And maybe that's what he wants. I don't know. It's hard to tell. He's someone who's bounced around, multiple promotions in his career, was frustrated in WWE. he's going to be treated with more respect in AEW. He's going to be allowed to wrestle more often. They're not going to ice him the way that WWE would. They're not going to, book him quite as confusingly as WWE would. But at the same time, I don't see him. He seems like someone that might be frustrated that he's not like a top guy at AEW, and I don't think he ever is really going to be. I also think that like it was very strange to see him come to AEW and then basically just like have this wasted month where they scrapped a bunch of plans, because AEW usually has plans for these guys that they bring in, and they're usually like pretty well thought out. And like I was saying, with confidence, if they sign you and they have a plan to use you, they're usually confident in going through with that. But it wasn't the case with Andrade. He had a couple of start and stop kind of moves before he eventually got going a little bit. But even now, he seems kind of directionless. Like, is he done feuding with Pac? He's done working with Malachi Black. Like, what's he going to be doing next? Is that going to be a major feud? He's someone that you could just do like, he's going to challenge Hangman Page on a random episode of Dynamite or Rampage, and you could do that match for like as like a kind of a quick title, like a 2-week title program or something. And that's, that might be his maximum role in AEW, and it's not a bad role, but it's probably not something like, I think his ceiling is way lower than someone like Alistair or Malachi Black.
Yeah, I mean, he had kind of an interesting thing that he teased with MJF, where like MJF sort of loaned FTR to him back when they were chasing the AAA, when they were AAA tag team champions, and so that was kind of an interesting thing there. But yeah, like you said, like AEW usually has a plan for you, and I don't know if that plan was to involve Vicky Guerrero in a more extended sort of way, and the reception of that obviously wasn't great, and so they did a good job adjusting to that. But at the same time, I was very curious. It's like, why would they pair on Vicky Guerrero out of all people? I know she has sort of a partnership with Nyla Rose, but that's just more of a AEW dark type of thing. That's not really something you see a lot on Dynamite. And so just to bring her in, I don't know if there's something more to the Guerreros, whether just bring up more of that history with, whether they have any history between their families or not. I don't really know there, but for other people like Ruby Soho, obviously they do come in with a bit more of a direction, more just whether it's just a simple title chase or just more simply just to like, hey, have good matches, and that's all you need to do.
Yeah, with Andrade, it's he might have nixed some of that stuff that they had proposed for him, or they wanted him to do it, and he might have changed his mind. I mean, it's a guy comes from Mexico, and in Mexico, it's way more political. And we know how Rush, his family, we know how Rush works, we know how Bestia del Ring works, we know how these people work, and it's it's a lot of politicking, it's a lot of trying to get control over something, it's a lot of avoiding doing jobs, it's a kind of a different type of style. And I don't know if he's exactly like that, but you look at how he's been frustrated in other companies with how he's been used. And it's, I don't know, he could be someone who's nixed ideas that Tony had for him, and he's wanted to do certain stuff. And that's kind of would explain kind of why it's been so inconsistent with his booking. I just want to talk briefly about some of the lower card people that have made the jump. 2 people in particular, I'd say Bobby Fish and Anthony Nese would be guys who I think we could both agree have a much more limited ceiling in AEW than the previous guys we've talked about. And they were kind of people that when they were signed, there was some chatter about, does AEW really need these people? Does, they already have such a big roster? Are they really somebody who needs a Tony Nese or who needs a Bobby Fish? Are those, people you really, really need if you're AEW? What have you thought about those signings and how they've worked out so far?
Yeah, for the Bobby Fish one, I guess that's just more of a veteran signing. Like, he's obviously been in the business for a very long time. And I think, you have Adam Cole in your company as well. And so I don't think it's anything wrong with, signing some of your buddies in there as well. I'm sure guys like Adam Cole did give a good recommendation of why Bobby Fish could be helpful to the company. And for Tony Nese is still relatively young. And so that's just more of an investment sort of thing. And he's always impressed whenever he's had the chance. almost not the new 205 Live, just more like back when guys like Ali and Buddy Murphy were on. I remember watching those episodes of 205 Live, and he's always looked pretty impressive in the ring. And so I think it's more of an investment type of deal there. And I think it's one of those classic cases of like, oh, like WWE guy who you don't watch that often is actually pretty good. One of those kinds of deals there where like, oh, Tony Nese is actually a much better wrestler than, most people realize because they haven't really seen much of him since no one really watches 205 Live. And so I just think more of an investment opportunity there, especially given how relatively young he is.
Yeah, I'd say both guys are good in-ring workers, and you could use them in a variety of roles, whether they're working with young talent, whether they're putting people over. Bobby Fish, I think, has a more obvious, direct role in the sense that he's part of this Young Bucks Adam Cole thing that's going on. He's obviously, Kyle O'Reilly is coming in, then you obviously have Red Dragon. So like, I feel like Bobby Fish, even if like Bobby Fish himself is not like this super duper star that you absolutely have to have, I feel like he does play a pivotal role due to his history with the different people in the AEW roster, that it's logical to bring him in because at the very least, he's a good in-ring worker that can go out there and have an entertaining match with like CM Punk or someone like that. With Nese, I feel like Nese is like, we're bringing in a lower card guy who has a relatively high floor, I should add, as a worker. Like you can expect competent professional performances from him. Is Tony Nese going to main event any of your pay-per-views? Is he going to be involved in a major angle? I don't know, probably not. But you're also talking about a guy who's never really been like that guy. Like he wasn't a top guy on the independents. Like he was never, when he was in Evolve, he was never like Evolve champion. When he was in NXT or WWE, he was very much like an undercard kind of guy. He won the Cruiserweight Championship. He's not like, I feel like he's like almost the opposite of Andrade in the sense that he's probably not coming in like expecting to be a huge star. He's coming in because he wants a job. And if the job is going to be working with younger talent or putting over someone like Sammy Guevara in an entertaining, television title match or the TNT title match, I think that's good. And like, it's not my money. So if Tony Khan can afford to pay Tony Nese, then who am I to say that, oh, Tony Nese there's too many people. Tony Nese can't be on the roster. If there's a spot for him, and I think you always can always find something to do with someone who's a very good in-ring worker. Then, put him in that spot. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't see like I said, I think expectations are, I guess, proper for Tony Nese. If you're expecting Tony Nese to be on TV every week, if you're expecting him to be a big star, you're probably going to be disappointed with how he ends up in AEW. But if you just want to see someone be, entertaining and competent in matches, then I think he's in a good spot.
Yeah, it's also very nice to see guys get a chance, right? Like Tony Nese has never gotten a chance in WWE. Like he's always been on 205 Live and made sparse appearances at NXT. And so just to get any type of chance of AEW to actually be on TV once in a while is actually, pretty beneficial for him to get his name out there a lot more than he ever would, just be on Peacock or the WWE Network.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you never know when something's gonna click with these guys. And you never know when they might come up with something, they might be involved in a certain angle that opens up a bunch of new possibilities for their character. You never quite know when it's going to click with people. I think Lance Archer is a really good example of a guy who worked in every company under the sun until he was in his like late 30s, and he gets to New Japan, and then he finally kind of figures out what he should be, and he's put into a position where he's allowed to do that. And you have a guy who went from being really a journeyman, who had been really just a lower card or mid card wrestler in all these different promotions. And suddenly he's this big monster heel with credibility that you can put out there in any situation, and he can have entertaining matches. He can get over doing squashes. He can, do jobs and still maintain his aura. Like he becomes this very valuable asset in that, it took him 20 years into his career or 15 years into his career to figure that out. So you're right. Like when it comes to giving a guy a chance, you never know when it's going to click with somebody. Another person that has jumped, this would be Ruby Soho, um, formerly Ruby Riot in WWE. One of the people from WWE's women's division who is seen as expendable because of the depth of the women's division, especially at the time. And she finds her way to AEW, and I would say, given expectations, has been a success. She's been probably what you would expect how they would use her, which is, like I said, almost more than Anthony Nese, but somewhat similar in the sense that we just need a competent person to go out there and have matches with some of our greener talents. And she's done that, and she's done a really good job. The entrance music has helped her get over, I think, coming out to the Rancid song. Taz singing has helped her get over. But she comes across as this likable babyface. I think she might have a limited ceiling as far as, I don't know if she can ever be like the face of your women's division the way a Britt Baker is, but I do think that that's the kind of person, if you're at AEW, that you really want to have on your roster, especially when you're still building kind of the foundation of your division. How do you think she's done so far in AEW?
Yeah, no, I think she's been really great. Obviously, like you said, you need sort of veteran talent. You need locker room leaders. And Ruby Soho definitely brings that with her experience on the indies and just experience in big time television, WWE as well. It hasn't been that long since like she went up against Ronda Rousey. She was obviously trusted in that position to really help out, a greener talent, Ronda. And so that's what she's been in charge of here. And, she's done a good job and being a credible challenger and really helping out young talent as well. Like if you do see her in like this TBS title tournaments, just we saw recently, she is a very credible challenger for that title. And she's very entertaining. She has a likable personality, both, on screen and even behind the scenes as well. Everyone who has been talked about Ruby Soho or Ruby Riot in any type of way has very much a positive thing to say about her. Like no one really has any sort of stories about her being a bad locker room presence backstage. Like everyone really talks very highly of her, has a very positive experience with her backstage. And you definitely need that in your locker room sometimes. You need someone to help out during these very long weeks of television that can happen from time to time. And, she's very much a good presence. Maybe she could win a championship someday, whether it's the TBS title or the AEW women's title. I feel like they have other people in mind they want to push, like your Thunder Rosas and your Jade Cargills, and even Chris Statlander as well. More of their, I guess, homegrown talents, you could say, minus Thunder Rosa, of course. But I think she could definitely be a credible champion. I don't think it would be a surprise if she were to win the championship someday.
Yeah, but now that they have 2 championships, I think that even becomes credible champion or credible challenger. It becomes even more valuable where you could roll her out there. Probably always, especially due to the theme song, probably always going to get at least some kind of positive reaction from the crowd. And you can expect competency. Like I think she's more charismatic than Tony Nese, and she's more over than Tony Nese. But it's kind of a similar role in that I think, like you said, like a high floor for matches, and it's more valuable to have that in the women's division because there's less women that are available that have the kind of experience that she has as a wrestler and are as competent as her, especially when you're working with Jade Cargill and you're working with Ty Conti and you're working with people that have potential, but probably would benefit from working with somebody who's been around for a while. And I think, like I said, that's a really valuable asset to have. With some of the other women that are WWE has made available, we talked about before we got on the air, but someone like Ember Moon or Atiga Knox could fill similar roles, and I would be very interested in them if I was WWE, just because any above average women's workers you can find, you should probably want to go out and get them, because at the very least they can help you with some of your newer talents that has potential. And from there, you can go even further. They could end up being, world champion material.
Yeah, definitely. More talent is never a bad thing. You have Mia Yim, I believe, as
That's
well
another
added
one.
to
Yeah.
that list as well. And so, yeah, more competent workers is always a good thing, especially with, when you typically have one women's match a week. You definitely want to make use of that time very well. You want to leave a good impression for any viewers out there. I think always, having a good match is always beneficial. I think that's what AEW prides itself on, is high quality wrestling. And if you can bring that on a weekly basis, especially for your women's division, I think that will really help out in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that in AEW, in WWE, even though she was given like a whole stable, I never really felt like she had that much of an identity in the company. As she was just kind of a generic heel, but also sometimes babyface. Um, was put in positions at times to wrestle for the women's title or wrestle Ronda Rousey. But I just feel like in AEW, whether it's like her entrance music again helps a lot. I feel like she's got more promo time. Her outfit, she has a distinct look from anyone else on their women's roster. I feel like she just has a more like obvious identity in AEW than she did in WWE, even though she had like the Riot Squad in WWE. It just seems like she's more of a identifiable personality than she was in WWE.
Yeah, definitely the Riot Squad early on was sort of like a Job Squad 2.0 kind of a deal, right? Like, they weren't really treated as credible on the outsets. They're kind of just eating a lot of losses early on. And I think she told the story earlier this month, or like a couple months ago, where like I think Vince McMahon or someone saw the Suicide Squad trailer and was inspired to make that into WWE, and that's why the Riot Squad were put together. Like obviously, Ruby Riot was sort of like a Joker type, and then you had Liv Morgan as a Harley Quinn, and I forget what Sarah Logan's role was in all that, but I think that's sort of like the very basic sort of genesis of the Suicide Squad. The Riot Squad was the Suicide Squad, the old, the original one, not the new one that came out this year. And so just on that outset, there's clearly no imagination or motivation to put this team together. And so I think that's why, the Riot Squad sort of felt empty, and why Ruby Soho didn't really have an identity in WWE.
It's almost like they came up with an idea for a stable, and they came up with a name for it, and it just like had no like actual plans for them creatively about what they were doing in WWE and who they would feud with and that kind of thing. I want to move on and talk about a few like prospective people. These are people who are no longer with WWE, but might become available. We mentioned people like Ember Moon and Tegan Knox earlier. Kyle O'Reilly, of course. Tea leaves seem to suggest that Kyle is coming to AEW. It was teased on AEW. Seems to have been written off WWE television. My understanding is he's a free agent. He doesn't have a 90-day no-compete because his contract expired, as opposed to him being released. So he could show up at any time in AEW. What do you think about Kyle in AEW? I think specifically kind of like, what could he do beyond just, tag team with Bobby Fish and being involved in the Adam Cole's kind of storyline with the Young Bucks?
Yeah, that's a difficult thing, right? Like, what's at Kyle O'Reilly's ceiling is the big question, right? Like, I think for him before, like when he was doing the Cool Kyle thing, like that was his chase for the NXT championship. And I think it was always a tough sell, especially for him to be NXT champion, especially with the way he was booked previously. And I think you might run into that kind of trouble there with AEW as well, where like I think his ceiling is just TNT champion. I don't really see a ceiling of world champion material for Kyle Riley. And I think that's just the history of how he's been booked. He's obviously a very good singles wrestler. I think more so than Bobby Fish. He's had more significant singles matches. I think the one against Shibata for the Never Championship from a couple years ago, I think that was in 2016, I believe. That one definitely stands out for his singles work. But I think primarily, I think even for hardcore wrestling fans, they've always seen Kyle O'Reilly as a tag team wrestler. And I don't know how you can get beyond that. other than just, a significant change. You'd have to really separate himself from Bobby Fish and Adam Cole to do that, which is what WWE did in NXT. Like, they broke up the Undisputed Era to have Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly feud. And I don't know if AEW wants to do that right away at the offset.
Yeah, I think that he does have potential as a singles star. More than Bobby Fish. He's a lot younger than Bobby Fish.
Yeah.
Which some people might not know. If you look at his career, he was Ring of Honor World Champion and a good one. He was, like you mentioned his match with Shibata. In New Japan, he was a singles star, especially in the junior heavyweight division. He had a couple of great matches with Kushida. So I think he has some singles success in him. I don't think he has the charisma. As it currently stands, I don't think he has the charisma to be like a serious, top guy or even like upper mid card guy in AEW. I just think the competition is too fierce. It's hard to compare him to, Kenny Omega or MJF or Hangman or John Moxley or CM Punk. He just doesn't seem like from a charisma standpoint, he's at that level. But I wouldn't rule him out. Chances are he gets really over in AEW. There's a feud you could do here and there that might, I think a feud between him and Bryan Danielson would be really interesting because I think they're very similar in a lot of ways. So I think there's a little bit more room for him there as a star than maybe you do. But yeah, his bread and butter is going to be, he's going to come in, he's going to probably join Adam Cole and Bobby Fish. Him and Bobby Fish can reform Red Dragon. They can call him that. I mean, Bobby Fish is coming out to the Red Dragon music from Ring of Honor, like straight up the actual music. So it's really not subtle at this point, but he'll be interesting. He's definitely an interesting person, I think, as far as we know what he's going to do when he first shows up, but what does he do after that? And does he have potential to go on further than that? I think will be interesting to see how that develops. The other guy who is also presumably available is Johnny Gargano. Very interesting person because he's not coming into the Kyle O'Reilly situation where we kind of know exactly what he can do first when he shows up. And I've heard some kind of, fans feel like been kind of mixed on Johnny Gargano. I think that a lot of people felt like he got stale in NXT, that his matches became too over dramatic, that he, the whole "why am I so violent" staring at his hands meme. And so I've actually heard people say, I don't really want to see Johnny Gargano in AEW. What do you think about Johnny Gargano's potential in AEW, and what do you think would be his role if he were to come to the company?
Yeah, I definitely see a higher ceiling for Gargano than O'Reilly. And I think a lot of that fatigue definitely comes in from just we talked about this before, how Johnny Gargano really overstayed his welcome in NXT.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all the sort of over dramaticness of his matches and his character has to do with that. I think Gargano really tried to make his character stand out a bit more. He wanted to try something different, and definitely very mixed results of his heel run in NXT. Some of it was good. A lot of it had involved Dexter Lumis, which wasn't really that great, especially character-wise and all the wacky storylines that they did. But again, that's just more in tune with sort of trying to adapt to what he was doing before, which, back when he was NXT champion, reaching his peak there. That was a very fantastic run for him, where he was having fantastic matches every week. He had a very consistent character. And for AEW, I can really see him making a very solid, sort of I guess, a mini Bryan Danielson light kind of thing, just being a very fantastic wrestler overall, just having really good matches with everybody. I can really see that role there for Johnny Gargano. And, I think he could restrain the cartooniness. I think he can be an effective heel character as well. I think we did see some positive aspects to his heel character, where you take out the Dexter Lumis, antics. I think there is some positive aspects he can do with the AEW environment.
Yeah, he could definitely be a heel. I think, like you said, a lot of his heel work in NXT was he was doing a lot of dopey WWE, backstage segments and vignettes, and whether it was Dexter Lumis, and he's this weird, like doing this weird thing where he's like pretending like he's acting like he's Indy Hartwell's dad. And he doesn't want her to have sex with Dexter Loomis. And it was just like this bad stuff that really nobody is going to make good. But, he, like you said, he's a great wrestler. I think he would be over really big, maybe not quite as big as Adam Cole is, but would be like, people would, he'd get a big pop, people would react to it. It would be very buzzworthy on social media, be a big deal if he showed up. And he has a ton of history with so many people in AEW. I mean, I think if he showed up, like, I've heard like this idea, like during like the elite right now are feuding with best friends. They've kind of started that. And so feels like you could do something which would be very, very similar to how Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson debuted, where, the elite are, you could do the same angle basically. You could have the elite beating up the best friends, and then, someone's music hits or lights go out or whatever, and Kyle O'Reilly runs down, and Kyle O'Reilly joins, acts like he's going to beat him up, but then joins, them all and stomping them down. And then Johnny Gargano comes out in the Bryan Danielson role, and Satan runs off the elite and joins best friends because, Gargano has this long history with the best friends, especially Chuck Taylor. They were in a group state, they were in Fist together in Chikara. Yeah. So he has so much history with everyone, with a bunch of different people on the roster, that there's a million things that he could do, but maybe not a clear direction the way Kyle O'Reilly has. He also could just show up and like feud with Sammy Guevara over the TNT title, or he could, show up. He could almost do anything. He's very versatile. I have less questions about him having the charisma to get over the way maybe I have with Kyle O'Reilly. But I'd like to see him out of the NXT environment, because he was someone who I feel like his stock went up a lot when he went to NXT. He was around on the indies, and he was doing stuff in PWG, and he was doing stuff in Evolve, and he was the Evolve champion, I believe, for a long time, and Dragon Gate USA. But he wasn't like what I would call like a top 3 indie guy or anything like that. Like I felt like when Kyle O'Reilly went to NXT, he had already had a very successful career in Japan, and had been ROH world champion, and had been like kind of a top guy on the indies. And then I don't really think he's gotten like better since he went to WWE. I just think he's kind of remained at the level of being extremely good. I think Gargano really went up a level in WWE. I think he figured some things out in his work. I think that he definitely improved his character a lot. I think he's a totally different performer than he was when he first went to WWE. And I'd be really interested to see what he would look outside the WWE bubble, now that he has developed, I think, his skills further, and maybe can take stuff in a different direction.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's obviously been very close with guys like Triple H and Shawn Michaels, and has learned a lot from them about, just working in television in general. And yeah, I agree. Like just seeing him sort of taking what he learned from NXT and taking it to a different place in AEW, very interesting to see. I think, again, like I think a lot of the criticism for Gargano is just more of an over fatigue of what he has been trying to adapt. Obviously, the Ciampa feud. Like I think some of the matches have been good, but I think we all can agree that it was a bit of overindulgence in a lot of the matches. I think that's a big criticism of those matches, which isn't always his fault. I think, but makes part of it definitely is. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he had some good creative inputs into those matches to make it more overindulgence, especially in the one final beats, sort of the finale there. But definitely, I again, like he's just trying to adapt. He's trying to adjust his character in his own sort of way. Sometimes he's gonna make mistakes, and that's just normal sort of things. But it's gonna be interesting to see how he learns from those mistakes and just implements that into AEW. Will he do more vignettes, perhaps? Taking some things he's learned from the production side of things in WWE. Will he just implement that more to his character? That's gonna be interesting to watch there if he does join AEW, because again, like we don't really know. Like it's the signs do seem to be there. He's opened up his Twitch account again, and he's got his Pro Wrestling Tee shop open, and so it does seem like he's transitioning away from WWE, more so than Kyle O'Reilly, who has like been sort of quiet as of late.
Yeah, there's other things like I believe both O'Reilly and Gargano are like expecting children, or their significant others are expecting children.
Right.
And so it could be something where it does seem like O'Reilly's coming soon. It could be something though. I think Candice LeRae was due in February. I want to say that that's a date, but it could be something where, he takes a lot of time off because, his wife is pregnant and then he's going to have a newborn. It might be something where we don't see him for 6 months. Or he could, show up on Dynamite next week.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things. Or he could go back to WWE and NXT. I mean, I think more so than, Adam Cole or O'Reilly, I think he does have a lot of affinity for NXT. And perhaps, he's happy to continue to work on NXT and help out these new, people that WWE is using in NXT, and, takes on a role as like a trainer as in addition to his role as a talent. That's also possible. But if I were to bet some money on this, I would probably say he's probably headed to AEW, and that would be the most interesting spot for him to land for sure. Lastly, just to wrap this up, I would briefly talk about somebody who will not be making the jump to AEW at the moment, and that's Kevin Owens, who recently re-signed with WWE. His original contract was expected to expire, I believe, at the end of January 2022, but he is re-signed for multiple years. I think it was kind of a debate about how many years he re-signed for, but he's not going anywhere for the next few years. Were you surprised by that, as far as not, because it was teased a little bit in AEW, and he obviously has a lot of friends in AEW, and he would seem like he'd be a big star for AEW, but also, has a pretty good role in WWE, all things considered. Were you surprised that he's staying put?
Honestly, no. I was a bit 50-50 on whether he would actually stay or leave, because like you said, he does have a pretty prominent role in WWE, and I think he has earned the trust of Vince McMahon, whatever, take that for a grain of salt if you want, but still, I think he's earned a decent amount of clout in WWE over his time there, to where he has more freedom than others over what he can do on the mic and with his character than sort of many other performers do. And I think, at his age, I think he's over 40 or just getting up there in age. I think he
37.
Yeah, 37. Okay. So like he's definitely prioritizing family. I would guess, I don't really know, but I would guess he's prioritizing family over anything else. And I think he is more comfortable in WWE where he's at, attaining this clout that he does have. Is it disappointing as a fan? Of course it is. Like, obviously you want to see him form back Mount Rushmore with the Bucks and Adam Cole to reform all that, to have more fun matches that he would in WWE. But from a personal perspective for him, like, I can understand why he would want to re-sign with WWE.
Yeah, like selfishly, as a fan, I wanted to see Kevin Steen again. I wanted to chant "Kill Steen, kill." I think he's a watered down version of himself in WWE. I think he's restricted a lot in WWE, even though he's still good as a performer and maybe has a little bit more freedom, like you mentioned, than the average guy. He's in a better spot in WWE than like an Adam Cole would be, right?
Yes.
Or Kyle O'Reilly or Johnny Gargano, or some of these other guys we've talked about who have jumped recently or might be jumping. Like, he's an established role. He's a former world champion. He's not pushed as a top guy, but is relatively maintained his credibility throughout his career. Is getting a world title, part of the world title mix right now on Raw. And he, by all accounts, got a lot of money from WWE. To me, it seems like a comfort thing more than anything. It's a guy, he likes WWE. He always wanted to be a WWE wrestler. He's been very clear about that in the past. Maybe AEW didn't interest him the way that, it does for other talents, even though he has friends there. And even though, he got a lot of money from WWE, and you could say, oh, he did the right move for his family. Like, his family wasn't going to starve if he was going to AEW, which some people make it out like, oh, he had to take the money. He has to take care of his family. I'm sure he's making more money in WWE, But he'd be making 7 figures in AEW, not factoring in, probably more money off of t-shirts, and he could have a Twitch stream or could do whatever he wanted. And I'd say both companies are probably similar as far as travel goes at this point. So you'd spend a lot of time with your family anyway. But I think it's a comfort thing, with him. I think he's comfortable in his role, making a lot of money, likes working for WWE. Good for him. As a fan, like, a little disappointed just in like, man, he would be so great in AEW. If you've only seen Kevin Owens in WWE, like, you're missing out on like his best work, because he's such a good promo and he can be a big character, and he knows how to work audiences. And I feel like he's just, he's working with a hand tied behind his back, because he's limited with, the PG stuff, and he's limited, and his promos can only, have so much freedom in them. And he's not always presented as a top guy. But if the part of the AEW existence is giving guys like Kevin Owens leverage so they can make more money from WWE. And so that even though Owens isn't going to AEW, it's still a net positive for him that AEW exists, because it presents him, with negotiating leverage. And clearly WWE didn't want to lose him. And so they made what would be considered a very good offer by pro wrestling standards. A lot of people are like, oh, he got a ton of money. He's making so much. He got this huge contract. He got all this money. And it's like, he made a lot of money, but all wrestlers are grossly underpaid, from a company standpoint. So if he's making $2 or $3 million, he should be making $10 million. It's one of those things that I think it kind of annoys me. Is like, oh, he's making so much money. It's like, that's because like wrestlers make no money relative to the revenue that the company is bringing in. So like, if he's making the third or fourth highest salary in the company, and it's $2 or $3 million, and it's $1 billion company, that's not really that like impressive.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we don't know Kevin Owens personally, and so I don't know what his motivations are for wrestling. Whether he's content with his career and he doesn't really feel the need to prove himself even more. Like, he already knows, like, hey, just check out my past work, or check out how good of a promo I was. Like, I don't need to prove anything else. I don't need to reestablish, I am the best promo in pro wrestling. Like, maybe look at Bryan Danielson, who like he feels like he has to prove something. Like, he wants to, really give back to the pro wrestling industry. Maybe Kevin Owens, maybe he wants to do it in his own way. Maybe he just wants to do it in WWE in a very limited capacity, and he doesn't really feel the need to, step out of his boundaries and really just to, hey, like, oh, I'm going to go in AEW, win the AEW World Championship. Maybe he doesn't have those ambitions as maybe most people would like him to.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's always come across as a guy that, childhood dream to work WWE, loved WWE, taught himself English, watching Coliseum videos that he rented from a video store in Quebec. You could tell even on the indies that he, a lot of his wrestling, whether his wrestling style or his promos, even though they did involve a lot of indie, were very influenced by the indies, also felt like WWE. Like, even when I'd watch his matches in the indies, I'd be like, he fits, like, the way his matches work fit like a WWE structure. He probably can't do the package pile driver, but it feels like kind of the way a WWE guy would wrestle, and his promos and everything like that. He just seems like someone who loves WWE. And unlike, Adam Cole, who's like, oh yeah, we'll bring you up to the main roster, but you got to change your name, shave your head, and be a manager. He's, has a reasonable role that one could feel satisfied on the main roster. He's not seen as this like, joke comedy guy, or he's not being buried or that kind of thing. And I think people like Bryan Danielson are wired just a little bit differently. Their motivations are a little different. Like you said, Danielson wanted to prove things. He wanted to prove that he was the best wrestler. He wanted to go out and have these types of matches that he wasn't allowed to have. Kevin Owens probably feels differently, and that's why he's staying in WWE. And there'll probably be some other people in the future. I know Sami Zayn's contract's coming up. I think his situation's a little bit different, but anyone who's a big star who will have the option of a lot of money in WWE or a lot of money in AEW, some of those people are going to choose WWE. And I think Owens is definitely, Owens is one of them. We've seen other guys whose contracts have come up, AJ Styles being another one, who have elected to stay in WWE. And we've seen people like Bryan Danielson or Jon Moxley go. So it will be interesting to see how that shakes out, and what kind of impact the guys who have made the jump have on those decisions. Because I think if you're like Adam Cole's in AEW, we talked about how happy he seems and how good things seem to be going for him. I have to think that impacts someone like Kyle O'Reilly or Johnny Gargano's decision, because they see this guy who is, basically their equal in NXT. They see what's going on with him. They see how happy he is. I think that does influence them, because it's not like they're taking this huge risk where they're going to the mystery promotion and they have no idea what's going to happen when they go there. They see someone that they trust who is basically their equal, doing great things. And I think that does play a role. And vice versa, if they could look at somebody like, I don't know, Andrade, and be like, maybe it's the grass isn't always greener. Maybe I'm okay in WWE.
Yeah, like you said, just the fact that AEW exists for these kind of discussions is always good for the pro wrestling industry, and but for the wrestlers themselves, gives them leverage over the companies to help pay them, at least more than what they should be paid. And so definitely these negotiations always help. It kind of be interesting to the other side as well. See, which if any AEW people actually jump over to WWE, whether they'll actually find success over there. Hasn't happened yet. Obviously, AEW is still very young as a company, but so next year contracts will be coming up, presumably, and so it'll be kind of interesting to see how the negotiations go from that other side as well.
Yeah, and WWE's kind of putting an edict out there where they're not really interested in indie talent and they want to kind of build their own talent up. I don't know if that'll impact their interest in AEW talent. I'm sure that if someone like, everyone talks about MJF, but if a Hangman Page became available, if someone like Adam Cole's contract expires and they see how he's been able to do in the main on AEW, maybe they're like, oh, maybe we want to bring you in and push you as a big star. That happened with AJ Styles. Like AJ Styles leaves TNA and WWE didn't show a lot of interest, and he left and went to New Japan and was working Ring of Honor and joined the Bullet Club and was able to get over in a different way. And all of a sudden AJ Styles is debuting at the Royal Rumble and getting a big push. So that can all happen. I think it's a really interesting. We're only a few years into this for a relationship between AEW and WWE that could last decades. So it will be interesting to see how that, continues to transform if between talent jumping back and forth, but it does create opportunities that didn't always exist. You would see it with Impact, Christian went to Impact and Kurt Angle and Jeff Hardy went to Impact. And, but we didn't, it's very different now with AEW and seeing the kind of just big names jumping left and right. And when will the worm turn where some of those names go back to WWE, which, like you said, will definitely happen at one point. Really interesting dynamic. Think that's going to be it. We're going a little bit long, but I think it was a good discussion, so I'm not that worried about it. We discussed this, but I think we're going to take a 3-week break from recording these instead of the normal 2-week break. And the reason is because the holidays and New Year's. But when we come back in 3 weeks, we'll be, I think, wrapping up Wrestle Kingdom, and we'll have a lot of reactions to talk about where New Japan is going, what's happening with all the Wrestle Kingdom matches, how the world title mixture eventually shakes out. So that'll probably be our first show of 2022. But for everyone who's been watching throughout 2021 and even before that, we continue to thank for their support. The award-winning, or not award-winning, the critically acclaimed Gentlemen's Wrestling podcast. But we thank everyone's support for continuing to listen to us throughout the year. Have a safe, happy holiday season, and we will catch you at the start of 2022.